Hello, welcome to Bible Questions with Christopher. This video is focused on understanding God's will. More specifically, trying to answer the question, what is God's will for our lives, by looking at 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 16 to 18. So if you want to understand God's will, keep watching. The Bible tells us exactly what God's will is for our lives. And one of the places it does that is in 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 to 18. Come on, let's see what the passage says. 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 to 18. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. This is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. This passage is incredibly clear. It tells us that God's will is that our lives include three elements or practices: rejoicing, praying, and giving thanks. We're familiar with these practices, and they should be part of every Christian's life. You may be wondering what the difference is between rejoicing and giving thanks. There may be a couple different answers here, but one of the ways that I think about this is rejoicing is praising God for who He is. Giving thanks, of course, is being thankful for gifts He has given to us. I want to just take a moment to emphasize that God's will for our lives is that they include three specific practices. I find that fascinating because most of the time when I think about God's will, I think of it in terms of what should I do with my life? What role should I have in my life? What decisions should I make in my life? Yet God's will is that my life include three specific practices. The challenge of this passage is not in understanding what it's asking, but in living up to its expectations. This passage includes an expected frequency for each of the three practices. They include always, continually, and in all circumstances. All three of these things effectively mean the same thing, but this is where the real challenge and difficulty comes in. So can we do these things constantly through our lives? Can we do these things throughout all circumstances? I know for myself, I fall woefully short of what this passage expects of us. If you're like me, you want to know God's will most when you're facing a major life decision. In my prior video, I explained what the proper motivation is for knowing God's will. I'll link that in the description and at the end of this video. I will say that when I'm facing a major life decision, I do tend to do a better job of praying more frequently. But as soon as that decision is over, the praying frequency for me drops off substantially. Now this is really telling. If you divide my prayers up and look at the amount of time I spend in prayer on rejoicing and giving thanks, it's substantially smaller than the amount of time I spend in prayer asking God for things. So I want to get much better at conducting these three things with greater frequency. And I have a couple recommendations on how we might be able to do that. First, meditate on the spiritual blessings that we have in Christ. Think about what He has saved us from. Think about our eternity with Him. I don't know about you, but this really drives me towards executing the three practices. It pushes me to prayer, it helps me with thanksgiving, and it really drives me to praising God for all the amazing blessings that He has given. Second, take 5 minutes of every day to pray. Find a time when you can incorporate it as a habit into your daily life. Within that prayer, specifically thank God for something and give Him praise for who He is. Try to make it specific to that day and not something in general. For example, I'm thankful that I was able to spend additional time with my family today. I praise you, God, for revealing yourself as a God of love in my devotions. I've been doing these things lately and found them to help me be more consistent in executing on the three practices outlined in 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 to 18. My hope is that these two recommendations will be helpful for you as well. My name is Christopher, and I hope this video has been helpful in better understanding God's will and in answering the question, what is God's will for our lives, by looking at 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 to 18. So what did you think? Let me know in the comments below.